Welcome to the Business of Bio workshop, focusing on raising capital and crafting a pitch deck. Please welcome your workshop host, Brad Stewart, Senior Vice President of Business Development, Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation.
So I'm very happy that all of you are here today with me. I appreciate it. Sorry to interrupt your lunch, but in the essence of being efficient, we wanted to make sure everyone got to eat and enjoy the content at the same time. So as I mentioned earlier this morning, for those of you who heard me, this has been a passion project for mine. This is now my 25th year in the state of Maryland running biotechnology companies. And it's been a long evolution from what it was like 25 years ago, trying to find talent here, to bring people here, to help make businesses successful here. And it's amazing the type of growth that we've seen, the maturation of companies, not only the increases in advanced biomanufacturing that we see here in the state, but additionally the number of companies that are now commercial stage, bringing products to the world. So we've had two workshops this morning about the business of bio to try and help our company succeed. I want to save the best for last. Most of the companies in our area look for equity. That's how they fund our businesses. I've myself had to explain to people that my job is to run a business that won't generate revenue for 10 or 15 years, and keep asking people for money to fund it. And so that's just the world we live in. It makes some weird sense to us. So it's a two-part one. I'll introduce the team from Cooley afterwards. We'll sort of walk through the mechanism of raising equity and hopefully give you some strategy about that. I'm very, very honored, though, to get to introduce first Sally Allain, who is one of the greatest people on the face of the earth. And I know Sally appreciates that when I say that, but it is true. We're incredibly fortunate to have Sally here in the Washington, D.C. area, and even more fortunate to have Johnson & Johnson here as one of our partners. So Sally's going to talk a little bit about JLABS and the whole J&J innovation program that's available to entrepreneurs here, but they really are an incredible resource that I think adds a new dimension to what we're able to do here, from starting companies, entrepreneurship, and helping to get those companies growing. So with that, Sally Allain.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for trying to embarrass me as much as possible. And but first, let me start by saying thank you for Maryland Tech Council and being very generous to us as we moved into the ecosystem here about 3 years ago with Johnson & Johnson Innovation. We often see great partners, but Maryland Tech Council and all of our strategic partners across the state of Maryland have been very good to us moving in. First, I wanted to start. I had the unique opportunity last night to attend a side-by-side conversation between David Rubenstein, who's the head of the Carlyle Group, and Steve Cass, who was one of the founders of AOL, if you're not familiar. He just put out a great book. It's called The Rise of the Rest, and thinking about entrepreneurship in this country and how great entrepreneurs really can be found anywhere where there's good investment. We know 75% of VC money in this country has gone to predominantly 3 states: California, Massachusetts, and anyone else? New York. New York is right. And we know we need to do better if we're really going to rise the rest of the country and entrepreneurs and early stage companies. When we look at also VC money, less than 10% of the VC money that's been deployed in this country have gone to women, less than 10%, and less than 1% have gone to Black founders. So we know we have to do better. We know we have to level the playing field. We know great ideas can come from anywhere. And we are working to do just that. So this is not a plug. I haven't read it myself. I've skimmed over it. I received it last night. But it looks really pretty exciting. And the work that Steve Cass is doing with his Revolution and many other organizations across the country. I think we are at a tipping point when we think of being at a catalyst point and investing in companies. So what I wanted to do today is give you an overview of Johnson & Johnson Innovation, what we do, how we're structured, and how we partner in the external space. First, let me just anchor us for who we are as Johnson & Johnson before I get into Johnson & Johnson Innovation. I mean, we are grounded in our credo This is many years of how we run our business, and that we believe our first responsibilities are to our patients, doctors, and nurses, to mothers, fathers, and all others who use our products and services. This comes up a lot of time in our conversations, and especially as we're also assessing science and technology and serving those on the other end of receiving that science and technology. When we look at external partnering, we recognize we cannot do everything internally at Johnson & Johnson. We know we have to partner with a lot of different types of companies, from very early discovery, entrepreneurship, to early stage companies, to even later stage companies for commercialization. When we look at our portfolio, it's one portfolio, in that what is ever partnered in the external space to what is in the internal space, it is one portfolio for us. So Johnson & Johnson has been in the business for more than 130 years. We are in 3 business sectors: pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and consumer health. Although many of you might have seen the recent news, the news of our new consumer health company that will be breaking away from Johnson & Johnson next year. That announcement, that name has been launched. So we are going through some changes. But I think important here is the money that we roll back into our R&D. In 2020, we reinvested just over $12 billion. We sell products in more than 175 countries, and we serve more than 1 billion individuals. So when we think about scientific innovation, collaborating, licensing, investing in, I wanted just to highlight some recent external partnering investments and licenses and acquisitions that we've done over the past couple of years to give you a broad idea. So here you can see on the left here, first of a kind robotic technology. This is our Monarch platform. We were working and have worked with Auris Health to bring that forward with our lung cancer initiative. In medical device with TrueMatch, this is a long bone 3D printed medical device, thinking about long bone defects and traumatic injury. Another technology working with Legend Biome was a license agreement for some CAR T therapy. And then also in our vision care division, looking at types of technologies with our contact lenses, and also thinking about retina care moving forward. So why partner with Johnson & Johnson? I wanted to give you an overview of the different groups within Johnson & Johnson Innovation and how we really do work together as we landscape, assess, and work with entrepreneurs and early stage companies. It was really important to us many, many years ago when we launched J&J Innovation that we recognized the value to those in the external space, that we would place ourselves in ecosystems where we saw innovation thriving. One of the biggest challenges, I think, when working with such a big pharmaceutical company, being on the outside, is how do you learn about what I'm doing? How do I talk to the right person at J&J? So we built our innovation centers. That was about 2008 to 2010 was the rise of our innovation centers of 4 locations around the world: Boston, San Francisco, Shanghai, and London. And when we launched that model, it was the red door to Johnson & Johnson. And those innovations are still in place, and I'll share a little bit more about that. But you'll see here, too, the footprint of our JLABS sites. We have 13 now across the United States, some partnered, some not partnered. With our recent opening of JLABS at Washington, D.C. just last year, we've anchored with Children's National here at their new Research and Innovation campus, thinking about the great ecosystem that's here across the DMV. So we really look at bringing all the tools in our toolbox forward, from collaboration to incubation, bringing our deep R&D expertise to the table. We want to do deals, we want to make investments, and also, first and foremost, accelerate the science and technology forward. So our incubation model is our JLABS sites. I mentioned we have 13 locations around the globe. And what we want to do is incubate companies with strategic alignment to our areas of focus. And we want to bring big company benefits to all the companies that incubate with us. That can be the capital equipment that we provide, the specialized instrumentation, the research and development footprint, whether it's on the biology, wet lab, chemistry side, medical device prototyping side. But again, all the resources that we can provide at our sites. To give you an idea of this model is 10 years old now. We launched 10 years to date. We've now had 845 companies be a part of JLABS. We have put in place approximately deals with 270 companies. What's most important, I think, to all the companies that incubate with us is that we're no strings attached. So we don't take equity and we don't take IP. That's, I think, a big comforting factor for the companies that join JLABS, that they have the ability to not only partner with us, we hope at some point we'll be able to do some type of partnering deal with the company, but then they also have the ability to do other partnering deals with other companies. If they're not going to do something with us, if we don't see the value in doing something with the company immediately when they incubate with us or years from being incubated with us, it's for their success, they need to be able to partner with either other strategics or other companies. But also if their business model is strategic partnerships, that they're not looking for full acquisition down the road, I think this is really important. So I mentioned we'll bring forward, we have the infrastructure, we have the capital equipment, we have the specialized equipment. Basically, we have turnkey sites for companies to walk into, to access at no additional cost, except for the footprint that they take within the space that they incubate with us. So not only the wet lab side, but also conference rooms, offices, hoteling. We bring in also the ecosystem around us to meet with companies, whether that's attorneys and VCs. We want to provide a differentiated model. So whether that's our resource hub, again, providing big company benefits for the companies that incubate with us, our investor hub, across all of the ecosystems where we sit, we bring outside investors in so that the companies that incubate with us have that network. So when they're ready to raise funding, they're able to make those connections and build the syndicates that they need. But also global investors have a view of our global portfolio and can tap into companies of interest with us at any time. We also bring our expertise to the table for all the companies that incubate with us. So every company that comes into JLABS gets a mentor from Johnson & Johnson. So depending on their scientific or technology needs, the hurdles they're trying to get across at the time, whether that's a deep understanding of a biology or a disease area, we'll pull in our experts from either Janssen R&D or Ethicon or Dupuis to meet with the company on a regular basis. And then also programming. So how can we bring knowledge, insights, connections, bringing a lot of you to meet with some of the companies and provide your expertise. So I mentioned, this is just to give you an idea of some of the statistics around JLABS and what we've been able to accomplish over the past 10 years. You can see here the differentiation of the sector types of companies that we have incubated. Predominantly, we are incubating companies in the pharmaceutical space, but obviously a large portion of the portfolio is also medical devices. These companies have done over $63 billion in financing and strategic relationships and partnerships. You can see here 47 have been publicly traded, 38 companies have been acquired, and the number of companies that we've done deals with. I'll also highlight, which I think is really important, and it goes back to what I started with, and changing the status quo and making investments where we haven't made investments before or enough of. 57% of the of our 57% are first-time entrepreneurs within the portfolio, whereas 43% are serial. 31% of our portfolio of companies are women-led companies, and 30% are minority-led. When you look at that number in the external space, it's 8 and 4%. We like to showcase our companies. I'll share this image here. It's our navigator. So this is our external-facing dashboard that you can land on anytime at jnjinnovation.com. And this is a searchable dashboard of all of the companies that are not in stealth. And you can see the distribution of where they're located, the type of technology that they're working on, the stage of the company, and company information as well. So it's great if you're looking to invest, as an investor, if you've got a business model where you need to or want to engage with companies, this is a great tool for you to utilize. So I mentioned our regional innovation teams at our innovation centers, the 4 locations around the world. And these house our experts representing our therapeutic areas and our medical device groups, driving the strategic interest for our external partnering. They are the experts in their field, their therapeutic area. And so as we work regionally and we landscape, whether it's sourcing companies for JLABS or being here at a conference and meeting with companies in science and technology, we work closely together with all of our therapeutic experts and assessing the science and technology and is it on strategy for us? Is there something that we can do with this company? And this is also our transaction teams. So as we think about executing deals, they are the experts from J&J on the types of deals that we might want to put in place with companies. It also holds our legal teams as well as our JDDC investors. So regionally, on the East Coast, since we're here in Maryland, we work closely with the team in Boston. So all of us on the East Coast know about the total portfolio from a regional perspective. Now, if I turn to our venture investment arm, JJDC, we are the oldest strategic healthcare investing group. We've done, just to give you an idea, in 2020, we did 45 investments. And we invest at all stages of innovation, from seed funding. So we think about the companies that we're incubating at JLABS. We're looking for not only to do some type of partnering, a collaboration, research deal with those companies, but we're also assessing, do we want to make an early stage investment into the companies to Series A and beyond that. We also do co-creation of new companies and some statistics here on how much we recently deployed. This will give you some more information and metrics for JJDC, our 2021 numbers. We deployed and invested $325 million, and you can see that's the average capital over 5 years. In a 5-year average, we've done 49 new and follow-on investments, and we've had 7 onboardings and 13 exits. This is 2 companies to highlight here. When we think about working in the external space, we did a very large partnership with Legend Biotech. And then highlighted on the right here is a company, Dermala, which was a company incubating with us in JLABS San Diego, and working quite closely there with an investment also from JJDC. I'll just put this up here. I think this is a really impactful slide when companies think about, do you want a corporate venture in your syndicate? Just some numbers of comparison here. So on the left, there's an 18% startup success rate for companies working in the pharmaceutical space, with no large pharma in investing or in partnering, where you can see the success rate on the right is 37%. And those numbers really translate from an IPO market capitalization median and M&A acquisition value, it's almost threefold if you do have that big pharma as part of your syndicate to help you move the science and technology through the clinic and commercialization. Our business development teams, again, part of J&J Innovation. This is a group that works a little bit later stage. So really the mid to late stage deals, the BD team will do licensing and M&A for us. But again, really staying close with all of us within JLABS and our innovation centers as we're looking at what's in the external space and what can we do. One opportunity I wanted to highlight is the non-dilutive investments deployment that Johnson & Johnson Innovation will make. And this is through our quick fire challenges. And this is a crowdsourcing innovation model that we've deployed really to look at great scientific breakthroughs and also putting problems out into the ecosystem that we are looking for solutions. Now, this could be our internal interests, or it could be with a partner as well. And we announce these on a rolling basis. I encourage everyone to continue to look at what quickfire challenges we have ongoing. And as mentioned, we deploy for awardees, non-dilutive grant funding opportunities. Oftentimes, this gives companies also access, sponsored access to our JLABS sites and mentorship from within J&J. And just to give you an idea, we've awarded over $15 million through this opportunity and through our quickfire challenges, and have awarded 170 companies, entrepreneurs, and individuals with 80 challenges launched. Another unique opportunity that we have is through our Blue Knight collaboration. In 2019, when we announced JLABS at Washington, D.C., we also announced a really unique, first of its kind public-private partnership with the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, BARDA. And this was dedicated to anticipating our potential health security threats, really thinking about activating the global innovation community and amplifying scientific and technology advancements with the idea that we would be prepared and respond to our global health threats. I mentioned we launched it in 2019. This was quite auspicious when we announced it, and obviously COVID happened. So good timing. But really what we're doing here is incubating companies in partnership with BARDA to bring science and technology forward faster. So BARDA will partner later stage, but we are their incubator model. So how can we identify companies that are working in science and technology like infectious disease, like medical patches that will deploy our next vaccines, to answer some of the gaps that we have, so that we will be better prepared for the next health threat. So we're incubating companies. The hub is here at Washington, D.C. It is a hub and spoke model. However, we are incubating companies all over. And selections of the companies are not just U.S.-centric. They can be overseas as well. This gets companies access not only to everything that J&J Innovation, JLABS can provide, but also an additional layer of expertise from BARDA, their sponsorship of companies into our space, and access to dedicated equipment and specialized instrumentation as well. So we really have a collaborative approach across J&J Innovation, and I can't stress that enough. We are a small and mighty team when we think regionally, and really look at everything singularly and together to assess, what is it that we can do here to support and accelerate companies. Now, part of the talk this morning was some pitching do's and don'ts, and engaging with strategics. So I've put a couple of slides together really to talk about, the engaging process, working with a strategic, some do's and don'ts on pitching from our perspective, and then also what we're looking for at J&J and J&J Innovation. So what is the process? I'm sure some of you are very familiar with this, but for those that this might be new, let me start with, it takes a while. So we start from a simple introduction and always from a non-confidential position, whether that's you're applying for JLABS incubation, whether that's you're interested in talking with us about your science or technology, we always like to start non-confidential. We'll then move, if we want to dive deeper, understand more, we will move to put a CDA or an NDA in place. And at that time, we will go into a confidential meeting, a deep dive. From that, typically we'll come out of meetings with even more Q&A. All of this will happen before we get anywhere near the opportunity of doing some type of deal with a company, and before even a non-binding term sheet's on the table. And we will really assess the company that we're working with, what is the best deal for not only the external company, but also for Johnson & Johnson. And I get a question oftentimes of what are the deals that you'll do? How do you assess what's the best deal to put in place? And I think this is where we really look at what are the tools that we can pull forward. Could it be as simple as an MTA to assess assets? Is it a research collaboration? Under the terms of the research collaboration for best parties, how are we transferring information back and forth? Is there IP generation? Is it something bigger than a research collaboration? Is it research collaboration and development? So we'll really look and working with the company, with their interests, with our interest, and put the right agreement in place. Oftentimes, within those agreements, if we can think about research collaborations, we'll trench payments around milestones. Most often in the early stage, working with entrepreneurs, early stage companies, what we're really trying to do is de-risk, make really definitive decisions on milestones much faster. So in pitching, I think some of the top 4 sort of segments of a pitch that I'll recommend is what is your story? What is the technology? What is the science or technology? Who are you and what is your team? And then what is the opportunity? What is the opportunity for our company, the patients that we're serving? And then we'll start to think of it as it's almost 3 legs to a stool. What is the clinical aspect, the technical aspect, and the business aspect? So what we will look for first and foremost is on the science and the technology. Is it a strategic fit for us? Does it align to our areas of interest? Or I'll caveat this, do we think it's going to be completely disruptive to the marketplace that we're very much interested in it? Is there a clinical need? You'll notice when I pull up some information about Johnson & Johnson, we're not in Me Too's. We don't work in generics. And we'll always look at assets. Is it a benefit for the patient based on the current drug or regimen that's on the market? Sustainable differentiation, we'll look at IP, the data, the competitive positioning. We'll also look at your path for the next 12 to 18 months, and then all the way down to market if we're going to do a really deep due diligence. But I think that 12 to 18 month time frame is incredibly important. What are your project plans? What is that next decision that you're trying to get to? And what is the funding that you really need to get to that next milestone? We'll look at the team. And I think there's a differentiation here on the assessment of the team if we are going to do a partnering deal versus an investment deal. So in partnering, yes, we want to see that you're supported by a scientific advisory board, but it's not as stringent, whereas if we're going to do an investing and we're truly looking at, is this the right team to take things forward based on the stage you're at? Or do we need to bring in others to support the company to take it forward? And then I think, we're looking at and assessing where can we bring value to the company that we're working with. I put this slide up because I think it's such an important visual for us, even for companies that are applying not only for incubation, well, for companies that are applying for incubation as well, and then partnering, it is, what are your plans? Where are you today? Where are you looking to get to in the next 12 to 18 months, 2 years, 3 years? What is the funding that you need? If you can overlay that on the view, and I think, what is the killer experiment? What are the killer experiments that you're running? And what is the funding that you need to get there? So I mentioned our areas of interest for Johnson & Johnson and certainly for J&J Innovation as we're driving our interest in the external space. So I just wanted to highlight here our areas of focus, both in our pharmaceutical division, medical device, and consumer health. So in pharma, in Janssen R&D, we're separated by our different therapeutic areas. And within our therapeutic areas, we go pretty deep into our disease area strongholds. This is where we work. This really defines where we do and do not engage. So you'll see, especially for our oncology therapeutic area, we're pretty specific in the cancers that we work in. And I like to bring this up for companies that approach us. Always recommend doing the due diligence on the company that you're approaching, whether it's J&J or BMS or AZ or whomever you're approaching. Really understand if they're even working in the space of your disease indications or your plan for where you would like to take your assets or technology. We also have a group focused on what we call DPDS, thinking about platform technologies that we can take across all of our therapeutic areas and diseases, and then data science, which has been a huge growing organization within J&J for the past couple of years as we think about AI and ML, how we can really look at real world evidence and the data endpoints that are coming out of our clinical trials. So within medical devices, our companies Dupuy and Ethicon, you can see here some of the technologies of interest to med tech moving forward. And so not only on the surgical side, tissue ablation, tissue regeneration, wound care, and then also in our orthopedics business. And consumer health, while we have not yet separated, we are still interested in working with companies in self-care and skin health. So some do's before I finish, before I get to the don'ts. Some reminders from our side and things that we recommend. Again, really know your audience, the company, the people, the strategic focus, and the commercial products. When you do approach companies, for instance, I can't tell you how many applications or information we get on companies that want to work with us in clean technology. J&J is not in clean technology. So I think just spending that extra time to really learn about who you're approaching and what their interests are. Recommend having a teaser, a non-confidential or confidential decks ready to go before you engage. Before pitching, I think this is a great advice. Pull together a list of written Q&A and write out clear, succinct answers and share that across your team that's pitching so that you're all aligned when you do go into meetings or do pitch. Have an effective story. Why are we here? Why are we meeting with you? What are your interests? What are you bringing forth to us? Get to the point early. And I put data next because I often see companies spending a lot of time on the disease indication, not really getting to what they actually have. So get to the point and really include as much data as you possibly can. Under whatever coverage you have, whether it's a non-confidential meeting or certainly a confidential meeting, really dive into the most recent and available data that you have. Know your landscape and really demonstrate why you're the best. If you're looking across differentiation, really be able to show what you have is very different to the other competitors in your marketplace. Pull the best talent forward as you can on your team. And if you don't have access to that talent, reach out to your network to pull in who you can to advise you on your board. Have a specific ask before the meeting ends. And thinking about the feedback that you can get from those meetings, I think it's twofold. It's incredibly important. So feedback going into the meeting, feedback after the meeting. And I put this in here too, when it's a no, it's sometimes not for an investment. It might not be a no because of your science or technology. It might be a no based on the investment strategy of the time. Or maybe it is a no because there are gaps in either the information that you put forward or in the way in which you communicated it. So I think coming out of investment meetings or partnering meetings, ask those questions. I think it's really fair that people also want to provide feedback as well. Don't have too many slides, seriously. We always encourage, and I always recommend having backup slides. So have your front end slides set and have backups that you can go to during the Q&A session. Go where you can dive a little bit deeper into your data. Or if it's a non-confidential deck, send that as a follow-up. I think it's the groups that are doing due diligence or meeting with companies are always going to have questions after the meeting anyway. We typically do follow up internally as a team after meeting with a company and then send a list of follow-on questions after. Don't use inexperienced advisors. I think, use your network, use strategic partners here, really understand who is giving the best advice and how they can help you. Don't assume that strategics don't know the commercialization, development, academic, and IP landscape. We're big companies. We have a lot of people that we pull information from. Even though you may be meeting only with 3 to 5 people from a strategic or from Johnson & Johnson, we've done our own due diligence before that meeting to pull as much information as we can from across the company. Don't miss the difference between a potential and addressable market. Don't share confidential information without a CDA in place or an NDA. And then the other piece, and this is the challenge sometimes, there's benefits to working with a strategic, is please, we recommend to take our CDA template or NDA template as a starting point. Makes things easier. Obviously, we will make adjustments within your legal review if needed. Don't feel obligated to have $1 billion opportunity. This doesn't have to be the next Amazon or AOL. Bring Steve Cass back in. And then also don't walk away thinking it's forever a no. I can't stress this enough too. It might be no this year based on the data. Come back in 6 months. Come back in another year. It might be no because this year it's not strategically of interest to us. Our disease area strongholds change. They changed year on year sometimes. They change every few years. So I always recommend revisit and find out if it's on strategy or if you have more data to come back to us. So I'm going to finish here. Here's some ways of getting in contact with us to make the connection. I'd be more than happy to stay around and talk to anyone as well. And then I believe I'm going to open up for Q&A.
There's a microphone right over in the corner if you want to walk over for a question. If you don't mind, since people are online also, just let us know your name and where you're from before your question also.
I'm Ron Baker, here in Montgomery County. What's the acceptance rate of companies that apply, and at what point do you monitor that? Is it the beginning or halfway through the end? But just curious.
Yeah, so 10 years, I think the acceptance rate has changed over time, and it really looks also uniquely different for some of our ecosystems. We first and foremost we'll make an assessment of strategic alignment for the companies to incubate with us, and I think that's fair. Our end goal is to do some type of partnering opportunity with the company, and to be able to accelerate it, to bring our expertise to the table. So it looks different. We also don't publish that acceptance rate. Sorry, what was the second part of your question?
I was just wondering if you qualified from the beginning and then if there's dropouts in the middle. I was just curious, but it looks like a pretty hard process.
For JLABS incubation?
For someone applying to.
Oh, so the application process. Yes. Yeah, it's really easy. So on jnjinnovation.com, apply here, and if you're interested in JLABS, it's a non-confidential application. We ask a few questions. We will ask you to upload a pitch deck, and that essentially starts the conversation with us. And we'll meet with companies if the application doesn't answer all of our questions, but we will stay as long as possible in that process, in non-confidential, and unless we put a CDA in place, but that's oftentimes after we've accepted the companies into the incubator. So for residency, timelines depend on the companies that incubate with us. I'd say our sweet spot for companies that incubate with us are about 2 to 3 years. We want to get to them to the point too where they outgrow our space. They've been so successful. They've been able to incubate with us. They've grown with us. They're ready to graduate into a bigger footprint. But if we have a deal in place with a company, they're highly successful, they're not ready to graduate, we'll keep them as residents. There are companies that are off strategy to us over time, and we'll work with those companies on best next steps. But I will say that 85% of the companies that have started with us are still viable companies. So that's another high percentage in the marketplace. Again, we want these companies to be successful.
Hi, my name is, by the way, thank you for coming, great presentation. My name is Hemi Chopra. I'm from UM Ventures College Park, that's University of Maryland, College Park. I have about 2 questions, maybe 3, if that's okay with the crowd. Okay, I'll make it brief. Do you actually seek out startups yourself?
Do we seek out startups?
Yourself.
Yes, absolutely. So we are here in the ecosystem. We'll engage in a lot of types of programming and activities to source and to meet with companies so that we can pull them into our areas of interest and into the incubator. Yes.
So that would be primarily through attending conferences and meeting people, or do you have a system, in place where you say, okay, we are looking at these startups in this area?
We use all different types of levers, whether that's active or passive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second question, I work in a university, so I work in licensing inventions out. And I know this may not be exactly what the startup community wants to hear, but I figured I might as well ask the question. So I have licensing, technologies which can be licensed to companies like yours. We at the university have a tough time finding the right person to contact in J&J, because we feel if you put it onto a website or something like that in your J&J, like JLABS or something like that, it'll go into a deep dark hole and never see the light of day. So we want to talk to a living person who can actually say good idea or bad idea. Who would that person be, and how can we contact that person? Thank you.
Yeah, would love to chat with you. And I think this is really, as you think about J&J innovation across the regions, so we all play a role within our region, working across, so for me here across the DMV, it is working with offices like yours, understanding what is spinning out, what technology is licenses available, and then also what are the companies that are interested in doing some type of collaboration.
Great, thank you so much.
Hi, Bart Koos from Horizon Therapeutics. So first of all, it's fantastic to see JLABS doing so well. It's amazing. Question is the relationship between JLABS and the parent company, J&J. Specifically, how does the parent company think about it from a financial perspective? Do they benefit? I know you said they don't take equity. Presumably, there's no right of first negotiation or anything like that that's given out. I'm wondering, is this purely just to grow the ecosystem, almost like a nonprofit from the company's perspective, or do they? And the opportunity to raise great science and then potentially do a deal and be able to see what's going on earlier.
Yes.
Or is there a financial aspect to it as well? That's the question.
It's not a for-profit model,
right?
So I'll share that. We believe in, if we're going to bring value as a big company, that we do have to go earlier. We do have to find that great science and technology. We know the external space oftentimes moves much faster than our internal R&D, but also it works, the external space, all of you are working quite broader than some of our defined focus areas in diseases and medical devices. So we know we have to partner. Within our incubation model, it is how can we bring it's the right thing to do, which is give small companies that start, so our big company benefits, early stage companies to accelerate that science and technology. So that's that's the model, that's JLABS. Now, terms change, I think, based on the types of collaboration deals that we'll do, who owns what at what point. I mean, that's really around the term sheets on the different deal types. And as far as equity investments, terms are based on what we do from a venture perspective with those companies. Obviously, our intent is accelerate, to do deals, to do equity investments, and then yes, do we take a license to generate data, utilize the platform to move forward an internal asset, or do we do a full acquisition and onboard that science and technology? I think everything's on the table as an option. It's not a one size fits all.
Thank you.
Jonathan Cohen, 2020 Gene Systems. Some years ago, Johnson & Johnson sold off their orthoclinical diagnostics, their diagnostics division, to Danaher. Does the company have any remaining interest in diagnostics, and if so, in what fields?
It's a great question. I think we certainly saw the value of diagnostics over the past few years with COVID. We will say we're not a diagnostic company, as you highlighted, but there is value in diagnostics when we think about diagnostics of co-viruses. So we've certainly spent some time, and with the companies that were incubating with us that are working in COVID diagnostics in 2019, but we're thinking about co-diagnostics with the flu, et cetera. Are we the company to commercialize that? I don't think so. But when we think of diagnostics with biomarkers, I think there is room to work with J&J. So if it's a diagnostic, it's a large panel of biomarkers. That's something of interest to us based on the different therapeutic areas and the different diseases. So I'll leave it with, it depends. Great. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Another round of applause for the world-renowned Sally Allain. So it's wonderful to have Sally and JLABS and the whole J&J innovation team as part of our ecosystem here. They've been here for 3 years. They're already a great partner. There are already a lot of companies that are helping to incubate and get to know people within J&J. I'm fortunate. So one of the companies I mentor is a JLABS resident company. They're a resident at JLABS in Toronto and JLABS at Washington, D.C. I can tell you from personal experience, it's been an incredible experience for them, the amount of time the JLABS team is willing to spend with them, not only helping them connect with internal resources at J&J, but external investors, technical support, even if it's helping to coach them through developing their pitch decks and training them, those sorts of things. So they're an outstanding partner, and if you know anyone that's a good fit for them, please reach out to them. So with that, the next part of our panel, we start to talk about equity. How do we raise it? What's the world like out there, and what are your strategies behind it? So I'll introduce two people for the next part from Cooley, Matt Shui and Lila Inman. So I'm going to let them tell you a little bit about themselves. Let me tell you a little bit about Cooley. So I'm very fortunate that Cooley has served as my corporate counsel before with a company I built, ran, and sold. Cooley is really the law firm in the life sciences space that works with most of the even late-stage startups, anywhere from Series A capital through IPOs. They have a lot of particularly unique skills. I've seen them really be helpful in helping companies understand how the real world works, not how we hope it works. And I think more importantly in that, their skill set's really unique. Not only is it working with companies like us to help us be successful, they most likely are also doing deals with all of our acquisition partners, whether it's mergers, acquisitions, licensing agreements. So their network of connections in this industry is unparalleled. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Matt and Lila.
Thank you so much for the intro. So I'm Matt Shui. I've been with Cooley now 9 years, and as Brad mentioned, we are definitely the dominant local and national law firm in the life sciences space. Since 2000, we've done the most issuer-side IPOs, and we represent a ton of companies in the space both locally and globally. Locally, our offices are in Reston, Virginia, and Washington, D.C.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lila Inman. I'm a rising sixth-year associate in our Reston, Virginia office, also in the emerging companies group. I started my career out in public accounting, and then told my clients I was leaving because I wanted to go be a lawyer, and they told me I was going to the only darker profession they knew. But I beg to differ after now. Being a lawyer and spending my entire legal career at Cooley. Similar to Matt, I work with life sciences companies really all across the U.S., but predominantly on the East Coast, and we're really excited to be here today. So our presentation today is really geared towards founders, but we hope that really anyone that wants to learn how to raise capital or learn about some of the terms will find our presentation useful.
Yeah, so some of this will just be teaching the lingo, just so you look smart in conversations with investors, and also just taking you through the process and giving you some tips on how to properly raise capital and how to hopefully have a high hit rate when you actually talk to potential investors.
All right, so the type of equity that we'll be talking about today is preferred equity. So this is different from common stock, which is typically the equity that is granted to founders and employees. This is the equity that is raised during institutional rounds. And our focus will really be on terms that financial institutional investors will be looking to set. And that's a more complicated process. But we also did want to note that there's two other types of equity that are less heavily negotiated and that are typically quicker to raise. Safes, which are simple agreements for future equity, and convertible notes. Really, the purpose of issuing those types of equity are to have these instruments convert at some point in the future into equity, but not at the time of issuance. Safes are a hybrid instrument. They have some equity-like features and some debt-like features. Meanwhile, convertible notes really are debt. And the two main components that are negotiated with those instruments are a valuation cap and a discount.
Yeah, both the valuation cap and discount are really just telling you how those notes or safes are eventually going to convert into a preferred equity when the time comes that you get to actually do that qualified financing. And a couple of other things that we're not going to talk about today, but just wanted to touch on for other avenues to raise capital early on, or just generally non-dilutive funding. So Sally mentioned, I think, one thing that J&J does, but there's other paths that you could consider through the government. So SBIR grants, SCTR grants are pretty common. Typically a longer process to get that money in-house than going through the venture funding life cycle. So we're going to focus on that for this presentation.
And we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A, but if anyone does have questions during our presentation, please go up to the mic and introduce yourself, and we're happy to take questions. We want this to be conversational.
Yeah, so initially, just wanted to talk about how to get in front of investors and how to prepare yourself for those conversations. So I know you touched on just recently how to craft a pitch deck, and once you have that deck available, how do you actually want to have those conversations with investors, and how do you want to be intro to them? So the first step you should take is just to create a target list internally. Figure out the types of investors who you want to have be part of your team after the financing is done. And it really is a team effort, and it really is someone you're going to be married to for the long term. So you want to really consider who those investors are, what connections they could potentially bring to you, and think about more than just valuation. Because in the end, you're worried about valuation at exit, not valuation at the time of financing. And in the event that you can bring in a investor who's really going to get you to that next step and has those connections and has people who can give you advice that's going to benefit the company, that's really what you're focused on. So I'd implore you to focus more on that than focus just on the bottom line number, which tends to be the first thing someone looks at when they see a term sheet. So create the target list, figure out the types of investors who you might be interested in, and it's often a tiered list. We want to talk to these groups first, then these groups, and have that set out. And the way you can produce that list is by doing a lot of research. You can look at databases, you can look at PitchBook, buy from Catalyst, you can look at VC websites, figure out the types of companies that they invest in, really focus on the type of portfolio companies that particular investors are looking at. And you can look at specific individuals on the websites and find out what boards they sit on and what their background is, because that'll often influence the type of companies that they're interested in personally. Also, it's great coming to events like this and otherwise kind of working through your industry memberships to figure out other people who are interested in your companies. And then finally, when you actually do that outreach, you want it to be very targeted, right? It is not generally that useful to do a blast email to everyone saying, this is what we do, we'd be interested in hearing from you. You really want to focus on them and send an individualized, personalized email to everybody and make sure you're reaching out to the right person. And so we're going to go into that a bit. Mm-hmm. So on the who and how to figure out kind of who those individuals might be.
Mm-hmm. So as you start to think about raising capital, I think a lot of founders initially are so focused on valuation and terms, but as Matt mentioned, really making sure you surround yourself by the right people and put together your targeted list is so important, because raising capital takes a lot of time. We get calls from founders all the time that say, I feel like I have a second job now. And it really, really feels that way, because you put so much time into the raise process that, your day-to-day job is also impacted. So as you're putting together your targeted list, you should think not only about, the obvious people in your network, like other founders, mentors, advisors, your alumni network, but also your service providers. So at Cooley, for example, we have a dedicated business development team. They're not attorneys, but they are extremely plugged in and have connections to investors. They know the types of companies that investors are looking to invest in. They vet companies and understand whether they meet their investment thesis. And they're a great resource for founders as they're starting their fundraising process. And so that's an oftentimes overlooked group of people that you should definitely reach out to and can be extremely beneficial as you start your raise process.
Yeah, they will give you individualized mentoring on that capital raise process, and your pitch deck in particular. They will sit down with you and say, this is what it's missing, this could really spruce it up, and just having those conversations before you actually get in front of investors is great, because a lot of times it's a one and done process, right? You're going to have that one meeting and you hope it goes well, and the best thing you can do is prepare yourself to make sure it does go well.
Yeah, they're truly the hidden gems of the entire process.
Yeah, so then on the how do you actually want to do that outreach? So the great thing is if you do meet with people like that or other founders that you work with or in your network, just having those connections, it can be very, very valuable in actually having those initial outreach emails and conversations with investors. So it's always great to get a warm email from someone who you know, who knows them, right? It's much easier to just leave something unread if it is from someone you don't know and there's no one else CC'd that you know. But if you have that CC on there, chances are they're going to have to at least have a conversation with you or send you an email back, just so they can show to the other person in their network that they're interested, and you want to keep that friendship fresh. The more you can do to utilize those intro emails from somebody else, I think the better. You can definitely identify some mutual connections in doing that process, figure out where they went to school, figure out what other companies they work with that you know that you might have worked with in the past, and just actually individually tailor your emails to each of them based on that. Additionally, I would say the more detail that you go into that actually goes in the email to show it's personalized, the better. Like, these things can get spread, and so if you send the same email to every single person and they say, oh yeah, I heard from that group too, it's much better if you see that, oh yeah, they actually tailored this just for me, and I'm gonna actually read it.
Mm-hmm. And then don't forget to attach your deck, which is the most important piece. A lot of times, investors are getting thousands of emails a day from founders, especially now post-pandemic globally. And so making sure to attach your deck so that they can pop it open and see if it's a company they're interested in speaking with is extremely important. And making sure your message is short and sweet is important too, because they get so many emails. Even if someone is going to help with a warm intro, sometimes they're so busy, like our business development folks, for example, they really appreciate if you can actually send a message for them to then forward to the investor that you're looking to speak with. So as much legwork as you can do up front really will go a long way, even when you're leveraging your network.
Yeah, another great touch, if you have access to the information, if you can also CC their executive assistant, that matters and makes a difference. That makes sure that your thing gets printed out and put on their desk. So do your legwork in advance.
Perfect. So now we're going to dive into the internal preparation phase of the capital raise process. And this is a lot like starting a relationship, right? The ultimate goal is to get an engagement ring, which is the term sheet, and then eventually get to closing, which is similar to marriage. But before you get to that process, you want to put your best step forward, present yourself in the best light, and we're here to help you do that from a capital raise perspective. So,
yeah, the goal is to avoid hard conversations with your investors before you actually get the money in the door, right? You want to look as good as you can for them throughout the entire process and show how buttoned up you are, because that matters, and that also influences what they think about you as an executive team, as you're raising capital, and what you're going to be able to do for the company after the closing of the financing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in addition to investing in the company, a lot of investors really are looking at who the founders are and what they bring to the table. And so making sure your company is as polished as possible and you're as polished as possible can go a long way as you start those discussions. And so I think just to start things off, entity type is probably one of the first items that may be discussed, at least on the legal front. So whether or not you've already incorporated or formed a company, or if you haven't, deciding whether you should form as a corporation or an LLC is often a discussion that happens up front. Choice of entity really depends on a couple of items. Number one, who are the founders going to be? Is it going to be multiple individuals? Is it going to be widely distributed? Are you planning on granting equity to employees? If so, then Delaware C Corp is probably the right answer for you, especially if the goal is then to grow the company and reinvest value in the company with the goal of eventually, exiting, whether it's in the form of an M&A transaction or an IPO. If you start out small and there's maybe only one or two of you and you're looking to take advantage of the pass-through structure of an LLC and distribute earnings, then maybe that is initially the right entity type for you. But we do want to flag that many institutional VC investors, for tax reasons, cannot invest in LLCs. And so part of what Matt and I do on a day-to-day basis is help companies convert from LLCs to Delaware C Corps in connection with the fundraising process. It's really not a complicated process. We do it every day. And so if you've already formed as an LLC, that doesn't prevent you from raising capital from a VC. But it's just something to keep in mind, that you will have to go through this conversion process. And it's very common for companies that we work with to start off as LLCs and then in connection with the fundraise, go through the conversion process. And if you are wondering, what are the benefits of, forming initially as a C Corp, which is a lot cheaper and quicker and easier, especially because Delaware law is so robust, and a lot of the C Corp forms are very standard and can be, implemented across numerous companies. And so from a cost perspective, it's a lot cheaper. But we have this internally developed website called Cooley Go that has a great chart that walks through all the pros and cons of each entity choice. So that's CooleyGo.com if you're interested. We'll talk a little bit more about the platform later on, but we did want to highlight this chart that is available and really user-friendly.
Yeah, so the next thing you want to make sure is buttoned up is your cap table. So as soon as you take investment from a venture capital fund, they're going to be heavily involved in monitoring that on a go-forward basis, and they're going to have some kind of approval rights on future issuances. So before they actually come into the fold, you want to make sure you have it right, and you have equity grants to everyone who should have equity in your company before the financing. So that whether that be co-founders, whether that be early employees, get that buttoned up ahead of time and have that on your cap table. And there's a few reasons to do that. So one, you want to help out your early employees and co-founders the best of your ability. And once a venture capital fund comes into the fold, the valuation of the company is going up, the actual exercise price of options is going up, and that's something you can't retroactively grant, right? Even if you had someone come into the fold years ago, you can't retroactively grant equity as of that time at a lower price. So get that done up front before term sheets in hand, and make sure that what you set out as your cap table to your investor is what it has everyone that you want to have equity before they come into the fold. So the other piece is getting an equity incentive plan set up. So equity incentive plan is effectively a stock option plan where you can grant equity to service providers, so whether those are employees, advisors, consultants. Have that in place ahead of time. They're generally very standard plans. And then as part of the financing discussions, you'll discuss with the investor how large of a percentage of the company's equity needs to actually go to employees as part of that plan. So just getting that set up in advance is always beneficial, especially so you can make those grants to early employees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's just to echo what Matt said, that's really crucial. Matt and I get calls every day from founders that say, I have a term sheet, but I promised this employee equity, and it was, the strike price at the time was really low. Anyway, we can take care of this now. And once you start the capital raise process, the value of the company's common stock is in flux, and you really can't. You have to wait until after the financing when the value has gone up. And so it's crucial to get it taken care of as soon as possible.
So the other thing that there's going to be a very deep dive on as part of the diligence process is going to be your IP, especially as a life sciences company. You're going to have investors looking at patents you might have, look at license agreements you might have, and making sure that's all buttoned up ahead of time is incredibly important. So there's a couple of different ways you can do that. One, for your existing service providers, every single person when they onboard with the company should be signing some agreement showing that everything they produce in their work with the company is the company's IP. So for employees, we typically see proprietary information and inventions assignment agreements that get signed up when someone joins the company. For consultants, in the actual consulting agreement itself with them, we should always have language in there that says that works that are made during their consulting arrangement with the company are the company's. And that is absolutely crucial and something that comes up in every financing. It's like, oh, we haven't had people sign anything when they join. Well, that's something that's going to get fixed or has to get fixed before an investor is going to be willing to invest, because they don't want to invest in a company that potentially has IP problems and that says they own something they might not actually own. So absolutely crucial you do that up front. And if you haven't done it yet, we could always get confirmatory IP assignment agreement signed with those people ahead of the financing. But really getting that done from the beginning is important.
I think we have a question.
Yes.
Yes. Many times universities spin out these startups, right? And
to repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question was whether or not VCs are aware that a lot of times IP comes from institutions like academic institutions, and that's part of how's that part of the process? So that's incredibly common especially for life science companies to have the foundational IP come out of a university, and that's something that's always going to be as part of the diligence process. They're going to expect that any type of license or assignment arrangement that's involved with that university is buttoned up and signed. And a lot of times there's like an equity component to that too. Yeah, where the university has a certain amount of shares of stock or certain percentage that they get as part of the initial financing. So it's very common. And the key from the investor's point of view is generally that license is currently signed and valid, and it's not just in draft form. And a lot of times there'll be a closing condition to an early stage financing if it's not. And the other piece is wanting to make sure they understand whatever royalty arrangement might be involved there, or whatever anti-dilution rights that university might have to hold a certain ownership percentage of the company on a go-forward basis, and that gets negotiated pretty heavily.
So a follow-up question is, does it happen that the VCs or the company later on in the process want to dissociate from the license completely and as the company develops further and doesn't necessarily need the license agreement with the university? Does that happen commonly, that these companies go back to the university and say, hey, we're no longer interested in the license?
So I'd say it's pretty atypical for a company to stop or disassociate from a university where foundational IP came out of that university, because a lot of times anything that's been developed by the company sits on top of that IP, and so there ends up being kind of patent problems, or if you're relying on prior art that might be associated with the university. So it's fairly rare if the foundational IP is tied to the university for that relationship to go away in the future.
I think I heard today that as companies, that as the company develops further, the founder may say, okay, I have to give royalty back to the university. How can I get out of this arrangement?
Yeah.
So I think that is probably in the back of VCs also, that after how many years can we say, forget it?
Yeah. It gets renegotiated a lot of times in connection with future rounds. Like as more dilutive capital comes into the fold, a lot of times the conversation becomes with the university, hey, we're not able to raise this money unless you reduce your royalty or reduce your ownership percentage. So it just ends up being an ongoing conversation typically.
Especially with later stage financings.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And so I think we touched on just now having license agreements in place with third parties. Again, oftentimes academic institutions, and sometimes you'll also get questions about your existing patent portfolio or patent applications as part of diligence. Just making sure you have counsel involved and able to answer questions that might come up during diligence is important. And then finally, you may or may not have trademarks protection when you enter into your first financing round, and if so, just being able to present details on that and show why the name that you're using is able to be used and is not competitive is sometimes important.
So separate from the IP assignment agreements, it's also really important to get the employment agreements, offer letters, consulting agreements, and advisor agreements buttoned up before the financing. In addition to the IP portion of the agreements, there's oftentimes confidentiality provisions that are embedded that are extremely important to investors, and so they want to make sure all of those agreements with service providers are all buttoned up. And for founders in particular, if you don't have an employment agreement, oftentimes it is a condition to closing that the institutional investor will want the founder to enter into an employment agreement. And so sometimes if you get that taken care of before you even get to the signed term sheet, you have a little bit of a leg up because you will have already built in, your severance provisions that are important to you, and you already have kind of a framework to work with, as opposed to some companies where there's no employment agreements. It's really a clean slate for investors, and sometimes the terms get negotiated in a way that's not as founder friendly. And so just something else to keep in mind in terms of housekeeping. And then, separate from the legal considerations, on the finance side, financial statements Often early stage companies don't have them, but they're using QuickBooks. And so that's generally okay, knowing that going into the round, there'll be a discussion about, bringing in an auditor or CFO, someone to help actually produce financial statements. At some point, they will want the financial statements to be audited, which is an expensive process. It is expensive for companies to get audited. And so that's just something to keep in mind and start to get the house in order. And of course, all of this can be housed in a data room, whether it's a formal data room that, is kind of run by your service provider, your attorney team, or if it's just, Dropbox or Box, just making sure you have everything kind of centralized, ready to go, so that when you start these discussions and investors want to start looking under the hood, you can, quickly grant them access without further delay.
Yeah, and ideally you were doing that at all stages of the company. Everything that you sign goes into a data room as soon as it's signed, and it should not be something you have to spin up immediately before financing, right? It should be an ongoing process. And I'd also say always have your attorneys look at that before you open it up to investors, because they can very quickly tell you if there's something in there that shouldn't be in there, or if there's certain things you need to clean up. And again, if the goal is to look good in front of your investors, it's nice to make sure that everything that's in there should be in there and is cleaned up and buttoned up, so you look like everything is in order.
All right, so you've been having these discussions with investors, you've done your outreach, your corporate house is in order, you've gone on a couple dates now, things are starting to get more serious, you're looking to get a signed term sheet, and so what does that mean, right? What does that part of the process look like? So typically, you'll have enough discussions with these investors that it's coming, and the investors are the ones that serve up the term sheet. It's not the company, it's the investors. And you may be wondering, do I need to sign an NDA? I'm letting them into the data room. There's all this proprietary information. Should I be signing an NDA? And that's a very good question. And in the VC community, it's actually pretty atypical that companies are asked to sign NDAs in connection with venture financings. And the reason for this is because the community is really relationship driven and it's very reputational in nature. And so if an investor were to do diligence on a company and not serve up a term sheet and not proceed with the financing and then kind of share the proprietary information, no company would ever take that investor's money again. That news would get out to other companies, to legal counsel, and we would advise our clients not to take money. And so sometimes there are sensitivities and investors willingly offer up NDAs or ask the company to serve up an NDA, in which case no problem, but it's actually pretty atypical. And so once you get the term sheet, you don't have to worry about the NDA, and you should, as an initial first step, send it to legal counsel and to the company's board to start reviewing. Now, sometimes our company side clients get term sheets that are already signed, that have a signature from the investor on it, that have a 2-day turnaround period. And so there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of kind of thought that they need to, they're going to lose out on the deal if they don't turn it around. This is really just a negotiation tactic, and it's the beginning of the conversation. We can easily convert it to Word. We can easily help you negotiate the terms. And so don't let that distract you, because sometimes we do get frantic calls from founders worried about timing and the fact that they have to just accept all of the terms or the investor will walk away. That's not the case.
Yeah. This is the situation where you can turn around and say the engagement ring does not look nice enough and you'd like something different, and it's totally accepted. Yes. And it actually, I think they will question you if you don't try to negotiate some terms in there as part of the process. So once that term sheet ends up getting signed, it is generally non-binding, so you can always walk away from the transaction, but there are a couple terms that are generally binding. So one is there's generally going to be a no shop in there that says you cannot shop this term sheet around to other investors. So in the community, it is very much frowned upon if you have a signed term sheet in hand and you start sharing that with other investors and saying, hey, this fund's offering me these terms. Or can you do better? Like, that is not a conversation you want to have, not something you want to do, and that gets out as well. As we mentioned, it's a very reputational business, and it will get around if you're trying to shop term sheets. So before you share the term sheet with anyone else who might be a co-investor, have the conversation with your lead investor, and we'll get to those terms a little bit later. The other piece there is that is sometimes going to actually have some binding terms is the confidentiality language. So we mentioned there's not going to be an NDA signed up front, but there is generally some confidentiality terms that get negotiated in the term sheet, and that's the other position or other thing that is actually binding in that term sheet. The other thing you should be doing as part of the term sheet negotiations is figuring out what the cap table is going to look like after the financing. So a lot of times a cap table will actually be attached to the term sheet as an exhibit, and it is in your interest to do the math up front. I know a lot of attorneys don't like doing math, and they are not viewed as people who like math, but people in our position, that is what we do all day. So we are constantly on Excel modeling out what a deal looks like, what the ownership percentage of a founder is going to be after a deal's done, what the investor ownership percentage is going to be, and figuring out what it's going to look like on exit. So we employ you. First thing you do when you get a term sheet is do the math, figure out what the investor owns, what you own, and if you exit at X value, what's your return going to be? What's the investor's return going to be? If you exit at Y value, what's your return going to be? And do that modeling up front. You could do that yourself. You could engage service providers to do that, but I think it's an important step of the process that sometimes people miss. And then years down the road, they get confused as why the investor is not willing to exit at a certain amount when they could really have figured that out up front if they did the math.
And as we start talking about cap tables, and oh, yes, we have a question.
Just a quick question. When you're negotiating the term sheet back and forth, it could take 2 or 3 months?
So it's typically very quick. So typically, term sheet negotiations can be a couple weeks for a venture deal.
Okay, and follow-up to that is, does that preclude you from talking to anyone else, or are you kind of off the street during that time?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So you can continue to negotiate with other people during the time up until it's signed, but the important thing is not to share the terms within. So you want to keep that confidential, but if you're talking to multiple parties, that's common. But just you don't want to tell the other party who you're talking to until it's actually signed. So
The ring's been extended, but it's not on the finger yet. So that's how we like to think about it.
yes.
All right. So cap tables and pro forma cap tables, which really cap table is what the cap table looks like today, the ownership of the company. Pro forma cap table is what it will look like after the closing of the financing. And so as Matt mentioned, as you start digging into the terms, the modeling is extremely important. And there's one term that will definitely be brought up and discussed that we wanted to highlight here today, and that's pre-money valuation. So that's what the investors will basically put a price tag on the company today and what they think it's worth. And that is a negotiated value based on what the investors see in the data room, what projections look like, discussions with the founders. And that value is used to calculate the price per share of the preferred stock being sold in connection with the raise. And so the way that it factors into the calculation is that the pre-money valuation divided by the company's fully diluted capitalization pre-financing will determine the price per share. And that fully diluted capitalization number is not just what's issued and outstanding from a capital stock perspective, but that also factors in the company's equity incentive plan. So even if you haven't actually issued those shares and you just reserve them for future issuance, that is a number that is included in the denominator. And, counsel, especially in our space, can definitely help you with this. It's my husband who's not in this world calls it venture math, and he's like, venture math is not real, but it's very real. It will help you determine who owns the company at the end of the day, and it's not always, intuitive. So we just wanted to flag that term. And then in terms of post-money valuation, it's really what the value of the company is going to be post-financing. And there's a couple of, tweaks and ways to think about it, but those are really the two main terms that you need to be thinking about.
And post-money valuation generally is not going to get negotiated. It's just the results of the deal, what the company is worth. And more than anything, it's just what you can brag the company is worth to people after the deal gets done. Mm-hmm. But it's not actually a term that's going to get negotiated in the term sheet anyway. Mm-hmm. We mentioned we're really focused on talking about preferred equity, and when we talk about preferred stock, the reason it's preferred is it gets paid back first in the event of an exit event. And so what we call it is their liquidation preference. So there's a couple different types of liquidation preference, but the general gist is if I've invested money in a company and I have preferred stock, I get my money back first before anyone else gets a return on a transaction. That can get tweaked depending on how successful the exit is. So, and the way that gets set up is how you define the liquidation preference up front. So there's three main types. The most common that we see that's most company friendly is called non-participating preferred stock. So that means you either get your money back, you get your preference back, or you get to participate with the common stock. and get whatever the common return is. So in the event it's a really successful exit, you are getting the exact same return that the common stockholders are getting. Next one that's the most investor friendly is fully participating preferred stock. In that type of transaction, you always get your money back up front, and then you also get to participate with the common stockholders. So the investors are always going to be better off than the founders on an exit and get a higher return. A lot of times this is disfavored by founders and companies because it's seen as double dipping, right? If we have a really successful sale, why are the investors getting more than us? That shouldn't be the case, right? So rare to see this. Sometimes a little more common to see in later stage rounds, especially when it's like a riskier round, but it's fairly rare to see up front in a Series A. The third is cap participating preferred stock. This is becoming a little bit more common now, given the state of the markets, and what this is it guarantees a certain return before the stock becomes non-participating. So, for example, if you had a preferred stock that's 1x with a 2x cap, that means I, as an investor, would get my money back first. Then I would get to participate with the common stockholder until such point that I receive a 2x return, and then the common would get the rest. But then you get to a point where the common is actually getting more than 2x, and you would choose to participate with them instead and get whatever the common stockholders get. So it guarantees you a return in the middle ground scenario where you're getting more than your money back, but it's not a super successful exit. But on the super successful side of things, you're just getting the same as the common.
All right, moving away from some economic terms for a minute, in connection with the term sheet that's served up by the investor, there'll be some governance terms that will need to be negotiated. And probably the most important of those terms is the board size and the board composition. So, pre-financing, it may just be one board member, it may just be the founder. But when you take in institutional money, they will want, typically the investor that writes the largest check will want a seat on the board. And that just changes dynamics, right? Because the board is the voice of the company. It's the body that makes the decisions on behalf of the company. And so giving them a seat on the board gives them, extreme governance rights. And so ways to think through your seat as the founder. You can have what we call a founder seat, which is essentially a seat that the founder has the designation right over by virtue of their holdings as a common stockholder typically. And so they get to decide, because they hold the most amount of common, who gets to sit in that seat. And kind of a spin-off of that is a CEO seat, which means that it doesn't matter how much you own. The seat is tied to your role as the CEO. And so what that means is if the board, who appoints the officers of the company, decides that you should no longer be the CEO, you will not be able to hold that board seat. And so there's different variations of that should be discussed with counsel, but we just wanted to flag there that how it's worded and how it's kind of laid out in the term sheet is really, really important to think through. And then, of course, separate from the founder seats, the largest check writer will want a board seat, as we mentioned. And then a lot of times there'll be discussion, should we bring on an independent board member, someone that is not investing in the round, that's maybe not even on the cap table at all, but that has industry expertise that will really add value in the boardroom. And so there's, maybe not at the initial fundraise, but, maybe later on, or maybe it'll be in the term sheet that the investor thinks that that's important. And all of this will kind of be laid out in a voting agreement that will be memorialized in connection with the round.
Yeah, I'd say the important thing on investor seats is just to make sure that whoever gets to designate that investor is not necessarily just tied to one side of the table. So it's not just the preferred stockholders who get to designate that person, because even if they're not affiliated, if they have that relationship, they were put on the board, they can kind of act as a crony to that investor, right? So you're going to be careful around that. But in most cases, those independent directors end up actually being the most valuable people in the room because they have the most industry knowledge and oftentimes have the most connections.
And then separate from the voting board members, there are smaller investors that may ask for board observer seats. And this means that they will have access to board meeting materials. The observer will get to come to the board meeting, but they don't actually get to vote. And so a lot of times founders say, okay, well, that's not too bad, right? They're just going to be in the room. Well, in practice, some of the observers may be the most vocal people in the room. And so as you start to think through board composition and board size, especially early on, it's important to make sure that there's not too many cooks in the kitchen. Because as you grow, more investors will want board seats in your subsequent rounds. And so our recommendation is to typically start off on the smaller side and, maybe give observer seats to really key investors that maybe are not leading the round, but that, you want to keep the relationship and you think it's really important to give them kind of this perk. But it really should be reserved for, investors that will really add value, maybe not necessarily writing the biggest check.
Do we have a question?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And the question was, how do you work on that relationship and make sure that really marriage, right? Because they're joining the board and it's essentially a marriage at that point. How do you make sure you're surrounding yourself with the right people there? And so I can talk about the institutional. So for the lead investor, the one writing the biggest check, they will get to designate who they want to be on the board from their fund. And because you will have had discussions with the investor before they serve up the term sheet, making sure to understand, okay, if the company gives you a board seat, who from the VC fund will actually be the person sitting on the board, right? You may be negotiating with someone that's more junior, but really they're going to have someone that's more senior come and be the board member, or vice versa. And you want to make sure that that person is aligned with the company's vision, and that before you sign the term sheet. And if you can get them to name their board member in the term sheet, that's even better, because they can't kind of do a bait and switch later on and have someone else show up.
Yeah, and that's pretty common for it to be the partner at the fund that you're actually negotiating with. So you can figure out that dynamic as you're actually going through the deal and have them actually named in the term sheet. For the observer rights, I think it's the same thing. It's not something you want to offer up in advance until you've had some further discussions with the particular co-investor and figure out if they are the kind of person you want in your boardroom and you want them in the boardroom for the long term. It's not something that you should just offer up right away, because you want those observers to be people who are going to provide valuable advice, and then also who are actually going to be like-minded to you in those boardroom discussions. Yeah, so ideally, you can talk to other portfolio companies where they might sit on boards and have a conversation with the founders there to say, hey, how are they in the boardroom? Do they provide useful feedback? Are they really tough in the boardroom? And get the feedback from fellow founders. That's probably the best way you can figure out what they're like.
You can talk to counsel too, because if you don't necessarily know what other portfolio companies that they sit on, it's possible that counsel may know. The world is small, and a lot of investors that we're across from, they sit on the boards of the companies that we work with, for example. And so counsel is also a good resource that you can leverage for some of those connections. Yeah,
it's pretty common that I have like the same individual on 3 different companies that I represent, and so I know what they're like just from seeing them in prior companies.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So another significant feature of preferred stock are protected provisions, and really these are voting rights and minority voting control rights that are found in the investment documents that you negotiate. And really what they're intended to do is protect the investment of a particular investor. And so there's 3 main types. So one's governance rights. Those are things like controlling the size of the board on a go-forward basis, right? We negotiated in this term sheet that we're going to have 5 members on the board. You can't change that on me after I put my money in without my consent. Economic rights, things like protections on exits. We can't sell the company unless the minority investor approves it, or we can't raise new capital at a different valuation or a different that's senior to mine without my consent. Then finally, more operational type rights. So you can't hire or fire executives without consent of the board members or the significant minority stockholders. So we don't want to come into a company and day one afterwards, you fired the whole management team when we invested because we loved your management team, we loved your chief medical officer. That's not something that's going to be okay with us. The pitfalls there, if you're on the company side, is just making sure you have those controls set up in a way that are going to protect the company on a go-forward basis. You always want to think about what kind of controls and voting rights are there around future sales of the company, future investments. What's going to be a pain in the butt to do from an administrative point of view? They have to reach out to the stockholders to get something done. And so having that in your mind when you're negotiating these is important. A lot of times we like to find compromises there where you say, look, if it's a really successful exit, you as an investor shouldn't be able to control that. If you're getting a certain return, you don't have a say on it anymore. And the reason you might want to do that is because interests tend to disalign a bit between investors and founders, right? They're looking for the huge home run. A lot of times founders might say, hey, we're okay with the triple here, and we want to still be able to get a deal done. That's still a pretty nice return for us, and it's still a win for the investor, but it's not the absolute grand slam that they're looking for. The other thing that gets negotiated is the option pool. So as we mentioned, something to get your equity plan in order ahead of time, but a lot of times you're going to negotiate the size of that option pool as part of the financing. So how much do we have to be able to bring new executives and employees into the fold to get the company to the next step? Generally, the way I like to think about it is it's meant to serve you for about 18 months after the raise. And typically, like a Series A, you're looking at 10 to 20% of the company to be set aside for that. Always good to actually have a hiring plan set up, figure out how much you actually think you need to be able to satisfy the interests of all those new employees who are coming in.
And then another term in the term sheet that directly impacts the founders is whether or not the investor will ask you to revest your shares. So they will look and see, okay, is the founder fully vested? Meaning, as soon as this marriage is consummated, could the founder walk away and keep all of the equity? Investors don't want that, right? They're investing in the company, but they're also investing in the founders. They want the founders to stay with the company and grow the company. And so a way for the investor to ensure that the founder is going to stay is to ask them to revest a portion of their equity. So what does this mean? It essentially means you get to keep your shares, but there's contingencies put on, meaning you have to stay with the company for a certain amount of time to own it outright again. And typically it's 4 years, and it's not necessarily all of your equity, but only a portion of it. Now, if during that period the company were to sell, for example, the founders do oftentimes negotiate acceleration provisions, and there's two types. And what this means is if there's single trigger acceleration, there's one event that happens that then causes the vesting to go away and the shares to fully accelerate. And that one event is typically a change of control transaction. Now, if you have double trigger acceleration, there has to be two events. And that's typically a sale of the company, and also the founder has to be fired within a certain amount of time of the change of control transaction. And in that case, they would get all of their equity accelerated.
So these are just a couple other things that we can quickly go through that are rights that are tied to preferred stocks and investors after financing is done. The first is information rights. Generally, an investor wants to know what their investment actually looks like down the road, what the company is doing. And so they ask for information rights to receive financials from the company on a go-forward basis, as Lila mentioned earlier. Sometimes those are audited financials, and you incur quite a bit of cost to get those to your investor, but something to be aware of down the road. Additionally, they like to have a view at the budget each year and oftentimes have approval rights over the yearly budget. They ask for preemptive rights, sometimes also called participation rights or pro rata rights or right of first refusal or right of first offer, which basically says that in connection with a future round, they get to participate as part of that round and maintain their percentage ownership of the company through that round. The one thing to know with respect to that is they're often waived in connection with future rounds on behalf of the whole group, the investor group as a whole. And so if you're an investor, you want to be careful to make sure those rights can't get waived without your consent. If you're a company, you want that to be easily waivable so you can pull in a strategic investor or other investor without having to offer it up to everybody. There's also a right of first refusal and co-sale right. This is a kind of handcuff that causes a founder to be tied to the company on a go-forward basis. It says, I, as founder, cannot sell my shares without first offering a right to the investor to purchase those shares from me. And if the investor doesn't want to take part in that sale, then they can also tag along with me in a sale to a third party. And if it's a really good deal for them, then I lose my ability to sell all of my shares to this third party. So that's something you commonly see. And then finally, it's registration rights. So two types that we typically see. One's demand registration rights. So if an investor wants, they could force a company to go public and sell on public markets. It's something we almost never see done because it's never in the company's interest to go public, and in the investor's interest to get cash through the public markets, given how costly that is. And the other piece is piggyback registration rights. So that is, in the event that you do go public, it's the ability for the investor to participate alongside that IPO and sell their shares as part of the IPO.
So that was a high-level overview of the terms that you'll be negotiating. We wanted to quickly touch on some vernacular that gets thrown around, the main one being lead investor. This is not a legal term, but it's typically the term used to just describe the investor that served up the term sheet, and it's typically the investor that's writing the biggest check in the round. There's no compensation or anything associated with it. It's just really to identify who's leading the round, just from an administrative perspective as well. And then in terms of costs and fees, a lot of companies, understand that they'll need to pay their own legal counsel. But in connection with the financing, it's very typical for investors to request a legal fee reimbursement from the company. So that means that not only are you paying your legal fees, the company's legal fees, but also the legal fees of typically the lead investor's counsel. And so that will be in the term sheet. There'll typically be a cap. So if they go over that and they do extensive diligence, they'll have to pick up, them being the investor will have to pick up the rest.
Yeah, another thing common, and it's becoming increasingly common in life science deals, are milestones. And so as part of the transaction, sometimes all of the money doesn't come in up front. It comes in different tranches after you've actually reached certain scientific or commercial milestone objectives. The important thing there, if you are negotiating from the company's perspective, is to have those milestones be as objective as possible. A lot of times we see investors push to have approval rights on whether or not a milestone's been met properly. Not ideal, because it effectively just gives them an option to participate in that next tranche of financing. The more you can do to make those objective metrics, the better, and the more likely that you'll actually be able to say those milestones have been achieved. And then finally, sometimes you'll hear about pay to play, or these are typically in later stage transactions, but a pay to play is effectively a requirement that an investor continue to invest through different tranches or different rounds. And if they fail to invest in that next round, a significant penalty hampers them. So it's oftentimes a conversion of their preferred stock to common stock, or a more dilutive type conversion where every 10 shares becomes 1 share or something like that. It's something you see more often in companies that are struggling, or where there is a need for significant capital, and if an investor fails to step up, you really want to be able to penalize them.
All right, so you've negotiated the terms, and now you're finally presented with the ring that you're comfortable with, and you accept the bling. So what do you do then? You start planning the wedding, and what does that mean for a fundraise perspective? What happens once the term sheet's signed?
Yeah, and so the first step is filling out the rest of the round. So oftentimes, because life science companies are so capital intensive, there's not just a single investor in the fold. We need to invite other people to the wedding, and so that becomes the co-investors. How do you have those conversations? Well, first, let's talk to the groom or bride, make sure they're okay with them joining the wedding, being part of the party. And so it's normally good to first talk to them, say, are you okay with this particular investor also being a part of this? Can we share the term sheet with them? Are there other strategics who you might want to have be a part of this round? Sometimes the investors will make introductions to other groups that they invest with and alongside with often. A lot of times it's you as the company telling them, hey, we've had conversations with this group. We'd love to have them be a part of it, and make sure that they can be part of the syndicate on a go-forward basis as well. So important thing is just have the conversation with your lead investor first, because you don't want to be seen as term sheet shopping if you're doing that behind their back.
And then, of course, there's the negotiation of the definitive documents, which will go back and forth with counsel, and you'll be asked to weigh in. And as part of that process, there's a really intensive portion that does take up company and founder time, which is the disclosure schedule process. In the definitive agreement, the main one, the stock purchase agreement, the company will be asked to give representations and warranties about the company. So these are statements that the company has to make. And the company will need to go through, and if the statement as written is not true, there'll be a standalone document that the company needs to prepare called a disclosure schedule, where you tell the investor things to make the statements true. And the disclosure schedule process can be time-consuming and can involve multiple people at the company, not just the founder. And it really is important, especially from a company perspective, because anything you tell the investor during the financing and anything that ends up on the disclosure schedule lives on. So the investor can't come back later on and say, you never told me about that. If it's on the disclosure schedule, they've been made aware. And so this is really an important part of the process that we wanted to flag. And then, of course, once the documents are negotiated, there will be groups that you'll have to get approval from. The most important being the board, of course, to do the deal. If you have existing stockholders, you'll need to get stockholder approval to amend the charter and do the deal. If folks have participation rights and don't participate, you would want to get waivers from them. And so there's certain groups you have to go out to. And then, of course, you get to the big day.
Yeah, it's always great to keep them appraised through the entire process, and you really want to talk to your stockholders and your board as soon as you get the term sheet. Make sure they know what's coming and they're in approval of the deal as well, because you don't want to get all the way through the process. Let your stockholders know, and then the deal doesn't get approved, because then you've wasted quite a bit of time and quite a bit of money to get to that state.
So we quickly touched on CooleyGo earlier, but we have shared a lot of information here today, and I know it can be overwhelming. So we at Cooley developed a platform that has many different aspects to it, one of them being quick, easy articles that explain legal concepts in plain English that can be referenced by companies and founders. We also have a document generator, and so if you don't have counsel initially and you're trying to save money, but you don't want to just go pull a form off the internet, you can use our forms that are available for free. And we also have a trends section. So if you're looking to understand terms even before you initiate the financing process, you can go look at recent trends in connection with VC financings through our website. So really recommend that you check it out.
And I know we answered some questions throughout the presentation, but we're all welcome to answer any more at this point.
So if anyone has any questions, there's a microphone right over here. If you want to step up, and if you don't mind, let us know your name and where you're from, just for everyone who's online watching.
Andrew Lees, Fina Biosolutions here in Rockville. So if you're a small company and no money, all this sounds very expensive to get started to find the money. How does it work from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. So obviously there's a lot of self-help that goes involved in the beginning, right? So that's why a resource like CooleyGo is great. You can do a lot of the easy stuff in-house. So we have things like NDAs, offer letters, things that are going to not get you in trouble. Maybe they're not perfect for they're tailored to you, but at the end of the day, you're going to be okay if you start with those resources. And then as far as actually soliciting money down the road, a lot of that most of the effort you're doing in-house, so you're not using advisors quite as much. And if you're working with like a partner like Cooley, like our business development people we mentioned are generally very involved in the process. That is not billable to us at all. They do that on the side for free, and it's just like an extra perk that sometimes your service providers might be able to provide.
And many early stage companies do what we call friends and family rounds, and so really you're not taking money from institutionals at that point. You're taking money from cousins, uncles, friends, peers that believe in the company and want to see it grow and succeed and want to get in early. And so those are not the type we talked about today, but those are more the safes and the convertible note rounds that happen early on so that you can grow and get to your priced round with an institutional.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you all for being here. Lila and Matt, thank you very much. As I've said, I've had a long-term relationship with Cooley. They're great people. More importantly, I've had a long-term relationship with everyone here in the room. We're done, almost, except for a couple of notes. Thank you all for being here. I hope it's been a great 2 days. It's a lot of work and effort that goes on behind the scenes to make this successful for you. A couple of people I'd like to thank. Stephen Walker, who's my co-chair of the event from GSK, a spectacular partner, and I thank him for that. Marty Rosendale, the CEO of our tech council, who's here year-round doing these things. The two important people, there's a lot of important people, but the two who keep me in line, Michelle Ferrone and Wendy Worm, they're the ones who actually get everything done here and let us take the credit for it, so thanks to them. Joy Hoffman here is with our Venture Mentoring Service program. So the Maryland Tech Council has a spectacular program to help mentor companies through sort of these Series A evaluation events and put together teams of seasoned executives with companies to help mentor them. And Joy's the person who manages that program and is happy to help anyone who's here. Jeremy's here. Thank you, Jeremy, for keeping us on track with all the social media. And I know Angela is here somewhere in MIN, so thank you to the whole Maryland Tech Council team. More importantly, thank you all for being here. If there's anything else that we can do, if we can do better next year, do differently next year, please let us know. So with that, thanks and goodbye.